Please be seated. When I say the name Pete Rose, what do you think of? A gambling scandal. Richard Nixon? Watergate. Monica Lewinsky? An affair with Bill Clinton. What about Britney Spears? This is for those of you under the age of 30. Britney Spears and the ongoing controversy with her family about her mental health and her conservatorship. These people are, well, people who have lives that are complicated just like ours. They have good moments and bad moments that are stretched together with a lot of mediocre moments, just like us. But when we hear their names, we immediately think about their worst moments. And that's partly because the news media perpetuates the story of their worst moments. News is more interesting and profitable when it's about bad stuff than when it's about good stuff. And it's never about the mediocre stuff. But what it has done for us is it has reduced these people to having their identity be mostly about their worst moments. And I think that we do that in our own lives as well. Every family has someone who is the black sheep, that person for whom the narrative about them becomes all of the bad things they've ever done. We have it in our workplaces. There's always that one coworker that's particularly annoying or ineffective or outright mean, who then becomes reduced to what we remember about their worst moments. It certainly happens in classrooms. There's always that one kid who's the bad kid, the difficult kid, the kid who can't pay attention or get along. And that narrative becomes that child's identity. And we do it to ourselves, too. We find ourselves in times in our lives when we see only the bad parts of ourselves, the failures, the ways we aren't living up to who we think we should be. We get trapped in the shame, the self-loathing. We become trapped in this idea that we are not good enough. Our identity begins to be shaped by the worst we see in ourselves. In today's gospel, we meet a man who we are told is possessed by many demons. And sometimes I think these stories about demonic possession in the Bible are a little tricky for us. They feel a little fantastical, kind of like if it were a story about dragons. Because we don't really talk about people being possessed by demons. I mean, it's possible that I have joked a time or two about a toddler who seemed like they were possessed by demons. But it's not something we say about other people in our society. We have different ways of talking about it now. We talk about mental illness. We have real diagnoses that help us to understand what's happening to people and to their brain. We even have great treatment and medication that helps a lot of people. But I can tell you that watching someone in the throes of a mental health crisis looks a lot like watching someone who is possessed by demons. My oldest daughter was diagnosed with very severe mental illness when she was 7 years old. And that came out of her in a lot of different ways. But in elementary school, she would have these episodes, and I can really only describe as like an emotional seizure. She would begin usually in a range, and she would scream and holler and yell and throw herself on the ground and throw things around her room, sometimes for 15 or 20 minutes. And then it would switch to another extreme emotion. She would begin to laugh, and she would laugh so hard that she almost couldn't breathe. And after another 15 or 20 minutes, she would start to cry. She would cry hysterically. And then we would get almost a little reprieve. She would sort of almost disassociate. And then it would begin again. And we would do this sometimes for 2 or 3 hours. And as I watched her, I could tell that she had no control over what was happening to her body. That her brain had just taken over. And the only thing I could do for her was sit with her, hold her if she needed my touch, and keep her as safe as I could. It was terrifying for her, and it was terrifying for me. And so when I read this story in the Bible, my heart aches for this man. This man who was naked, this man who lived in the caves outside of town, the caves where they buried people. He was literally living among the dead. Hungry and cold and alone. And I imagine that there were moments in time where he was lucid and he was aware of all that he had lost, and he had lost everything. He had lost his community, he had lost his family. He had even lost his own identity. He had lost his own sense of self. When Jesus asked him his name, he replied, Legion. And legion, of course, to us means a lot. It means multitude. But in first century Palestine, it had a very specific meaning. For you see, a legion was the basic unit in the Roman military. A legion was a cohort of 6,000 soldiers, so it does mean a lot. But it also references that the Romans were occupying Israel. They were an unwanted occupant. And they were unwanted in that man, occupying his body and his brain. He no longer had his own name. He no longer had his own identity. He was only known by the illness that possessed his body. And so when Jesus calls the demons out, when he sends them into the swine, Jesus is not only healing him, not only giving him reprieve from the symptoms that tormented him, but Jesus is restoring him to himself. Jesus is giving him. He is free to live as himself once again. And in receiving his identity again, he is once again restored to his community and to his family. Healing means having his own self back again. This is the good news of the gospel today. That Jesus does the same for us. when we are stuck in the muck and the mire of shame and self-loathing, when we are lost in our heads and we have lost track of who we really are, when we begin to believe the things that the world says about us, Jesus restores us. Jesus forgives us. Jesus heals us. Jesus reminds us that at the core of our being, we are beloved children of God. That no matter where we go or what we do, God always, always loves us. Paul says in his letter today that as children of Abraham, we are heirs to the promise. We are heirs to the promise. You might remember way back at the beginning of the book, in Genesis, that God promises Abraham that he will bless us and that by us, the whole world will be blessed. You are blessed to be a blessing. And we are. We are so richly and abundantly blessed. The core of our identity is children of God who are loved, forgiven, and blessed. And the trick is to remember that not only is that true about us, but it's true about everybody else too. Amen.